For some reason, in most people's minds, 200,000 is this success, high success, just like this bar of I've reached a high performing property, right? Like think about it, $200,000 in gross income, that's a lot of money, right? But the reality is it's what? Gross income. Gross income is the income you make before all of your expenses. It tells me nothing. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Cash Flow Positive. I'm your host, Kenny Bedwell, and my goal today is to help you understand what vanity metrics are in the STR world and how the data actually can paint the real picture. So there are three key vanity metrics that are commonly used. We'll call them, I think it's cooler to call them the STR swear words or curse words that drive me bonkers when I hear people use them as a measure of success. But in reality, it doesn't paint a full picture. Okay, so we're going to dive into those three metrics today. And it's not necessarily that these metrics are bad, it's how you use them that can be misleading. Okay. And so my goal is to help you become educated on these vanity metrics so that you can paint the full picture and see through the crap. So let's dive in it today. Okay. So number one, first off, and guys, the third vanity metric I'm going to share with you is going to be one that you're going to be like, I get it. Like that's a big one. And it's really going to help you on the acquisition side. But let's start with the number one vanity metric. So the first vanity metric that I hear a lot, it kind of ties in. I hear it three ways, and it's essentially occupancy rate. So when someone says, "Well, I have a high occupancy rate," that leads people to assume what? Number one, and another way of saying occupancy in the short-term rental space is getting bookings. When someone says, "I get a lot of bookings," that means I have a high occupancy rate. It's the same thing. Okay. Now, I like what is a high occupancy rate and how you define as high or low or whatever. That's, defined by each person. But I get a lot of bookings means I have a higher occupancy rate, right? And why is it a vanity metric though? Is that a bad thing? No, getting bookings is a great thing. Having a good, high, healthy occupancy rate. Now, you can hear me kind of say healthy because I don't really believe in super high occupancy rates unless it's like middle of peak season, but a healthy occupancy rate is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But using it to define success is where the problem's at. And I'm going to give you some examples of this. So, one thing I hear is someone says, "Well, my property gets lots of bookings." Cool, but are you making money? Is your property profitable? I can price my property at $1 a night and have 100% occupancy and get tons of bookings, but I'm only making $30 or $31 a month, right? So that's not profitable. So saying that, well, that property has high occupancy means jack crap to me. It means nothing. It's a part of the puzzle or part of the equation, but I still have the rest of the equation to figure out, right? And it's the same thing. Somebody was commenting on Facebook about something, and they're like, well, Airbnb reported that hosts that switched to a certain fee structure or whatever got more bookings. Bum, bum, bum. Vanity metric alert. And I'm like, that doesn't mean anything to me. Of course, Airbnb would say that they'd get more bookings. That means they're basically drop their prices down to accommodate Airbnb. And therefore, Airbnb is saying, well, you're going to get more bookings, but it doesn't equate to more revenue. I don't care about more bookings if I'm not making any money from those bookings. I want more revenue. I want a healthy occupancy rate with a healthy ADR, okay? Which doesn't equate to 100% occupancy. Okay, most good properties, it honestly doesn't even matter. My number one ROI property is at a 46% occupancy rate. 46% occupancy rate for the year. Most people would freak out about that. They'd be like, "Oh, it's not getting enough. Oh, it's too much seasonality," which that's another way of saying occupancy, and we'll talk about that one in a second too. But basically, oh, it's not good. But it doesn't paint the full picture. That's the property I bought for $350,000. That's netting over $80,000 a year. Yeah, everyone would take that every day and night for only a 46% occupancy rate. And to think about it too, 46% occupancy rate, that means only half the year that property is occupied. And guess what? That's less wear and tear. That's less maintenance and upkeep that property has to have compared to a property that's running at a 90 to 100% occupancy rate year round that's trying to earn the same revenue. I guarantee you their costs are going to be a lot higher than mine. So, occupancy rate is a vanity metric. And the third point I want to point out on that, another one I commonly hear, especially from people who are looking for their first properties, and they're going, Kenny, I don't want something seasonal. I want something that's got year round, that's booked year round, that's going to pay the bills every single month. Vanity metric there. That bookings and seasonality is tied to occupancy rate, right? In a sense, those are part of the equation of how much profitability a property makes or how much cash flow a property can make. So yes, it would make you feel more comfortable if your property was booked year round, but we're not chasing monthly returns, are we? No, we're not. We're chasing yearly returns. That's what I want you to say out loud. I'm chasing yearly returns. I'm not going after, oh, well, what's the ROI in January? What's the ROI in February? That doesn't matter. What's the ROI for this year? Some months are going to be down, other months will be way up, and that's where it makes up the difference. I make over 65 to 70% of my revenue in the span of 3 months on one property. On other properties, I might make that in 6 months, which is totally fine. But it doesn't matter to me because I only care about one thing. Does the property cash flow? And if the answer is no, then it doesn't matter what the seasonality is. It doesn't matter if it's a year-round market, which doesn't actually exist, by the way. It doesn't matter if it's booked, 80% of the time. If it don't cash flow, Kenny ain't buying it. Okay? That's the first vanity metric, and that's the most commonly heard one is the property is booked all the time means nothing to me. Okay? I need to know what the ADR is so then I can calculate revenue. I mean, honestly, just tell me what the revenue is. All right. All right. Number 2. Okay. This is another one that's pretty common. And it shows up in a couple different ways, similar to occupancy rate. But this is rating. Okay. Now, ratings are very important. I want to be very clear on this. We want to shoot to have the highest rating possible. But I have a property that has a rating of a 4.89. Good, not great. Okay. Why does it have a 4.8 when I have to explain myself on that one? We didn't renovate it for 2 years and it was kind of old and it produced income, but you know what? Like people will complain. They wanted something nicer than where they stayed. I learned that lesson the hard way. I've had that property for the longest now. I've had it for 5 years now and I've kept it. And the ratings have gone up. It was much lower than 4.89 at one point. Once we renovated it, stopped getting complaints. So I understand the value of a rating. However, I want to listen to this. All my competitors in the same market, they're all 4.95, 4.96, 4.92, 4.9, whatever. Okay. My closest competitor makes $60,000 less than I do. $60,000. They make like 80,000. I make 144 last year. Okay. $60,000 less than me. So, and they all have a higher rating than me. So rating doesn't necessarily equate to success either. And I see it all the time with people, selling a property. This is a 1% guest favorite on Airbnb or top 5% guest favorite. And I'm a super host and all this like great stuff. And this property is the number one it's got a 5.0 with 50 reviews, which is impressive. I'm not saying it's not impressive. It's actually very impressive. And kudos to you. But that's like a pat on the back that means nothing about profitability. Guest satisfaction can help with profitability, but it doesn't guarantee profitability. And it's only one part of the equation. Therefore, it's a vanity metric. Okay. Piecing out what we're basically learning here is piecing out and judging the success of a property based on individual metrics does not tell you the profitability or the well-being of an asset or even a portfolio. That's the lesson, the underarching lesson of today's podcast. So the vanity metric here is understanding that, hey, my ratings, although they're important and we want to shoot for the highest as possible, it's not actually a direct correlation to profitability. Keyword profitability. Okay. Now, I do want to emphasize this. Obviously, the higher the rating you get, the higher you can rank in the algorithm. Okay. There's a lot of factors that go into the algorithm. It's not just one key metric that allows you to go higher in the algorithm. But ratings are very important, but they're also not directly linked to or like directly cause cash flow of a property. They can help cash flow, but they're not because I have a high rating, this property is guaranteed to cash flow higher. It means nothing. So whenever you see so in selling a property and they're like, "Oh, this property has high bookings and a high rating." Even those two things together, that sounds appealing, that sounds successful, but the reality is, how are they defining success versus how are you defining success and what you're looking for? That's what you need to understand. If you're defining success as, is this property profitable? Is this property going to cash flow and get me the returns I'm looking for? Then those two metrics alone don't tell you a thing. They tell you that it's a good property and people enjoy it. That's awesome. I can find those everywhere. That's not hard to do. And I can find a lot of those that don't cash flow at all. That's the easy part. The hard part is getting and figuring out, does the property actually cash flow? And you have to be careful because there are a lot of sharks out there today. There's realtors, there are brokers, there's sellers who are desperate to sell properties because the market has shifted, the market has changed, especially this year. There's a lot more uncertainty. We've talked about the data. Have I even talked about that? No, oh boy. Okay, maybe I'll drop a little bit of data here. I don't remember actually. So 2026 is pacing down 5 to 10%. And if you guys have heard this, send me a message after this and be like, Kenny already talked about it, but I'll briefly hit the highlights. So we're looking at the data all across the United States market for Airbnb VRBO. There's a couple things we're seeing in 2026, the beginning of this half. Number one, the booking lead times, or how far in advance people are booking, is it dropping considerably. Okay. Partly because, we've got stuff going on, wars and all these other things, gas prices, all that. So people are booking closer to their actual dates. What happens, our industries are people drop their prices, they get their bookings, but now they're making less. Right. So revenue is pacing downwards. Depending on the market, it varies. Some markets are flat. Most markets are down 5 to 10% on average. Okay. Even the top performers are down too right now. That doesn't mean it can't change, but I don't think we're going to have a great summer compared, like, as good of a summer as, maybe last year or even the year before. It's just going to be down. All right. So that's good to know. Now, when I'm talking about sellers going, I want to tie this back into the vanity metrics, is that people are, talking about they're selling things to justify a higher purchase price so that they can exit. Or when I say exit out of that property doesn't mean they're leaving short-term rentals. It just means they're exiting out of that property. They're trying to make it appealing so that you will overpay for a property. Okay. So they're saying things like, hey, this property has great ratings, great reviews. People love staying here. Okay, cool. It's a short-term rental. They should love staying there. That's an obvious one. Number two, they are saying that, hey, this property has a lot of bookings. This property gets a lot of bookings. I hear that one pretty often too. High occupancy rate. Cool. Once again, doesn't tell me everything. But the third vanity metric, and this is the one that I hear the most, especially if you're looking for acquisitions. And we're gonna spend some time on this one, and I'm gonna rip it apart. Gross revenue. Gross revenue. This property has high gross revenue. This property grosses over 200,000. This property grosses over 150,000, whatever it is. Okay. People use gross revenue as a success metric. Typically, it doesn't, who freaking cares? But like the one that I hear the most is, especially if a property grosses over 200,000, for some reason, in most people's minds, 200,000 is this success, high success, just like this bar of, I've reached a high performing property, right? Like, think about it, $200,000 in gross income. That's a lot of money, right? But the reality is it's what? Gross income. Gross income is the income you make before all of your expenses. It tells me nothing. So if I buy a property, it really doesn't matter what the purchase price is. Well, it could. If I buy a property for $3 million and it only grosses 200,000, that property is going to be negative, right? But that property grosses $200,000. So when you hear gross revenue, it's only one side of the story. It means nothing. And so what people are doing is they're disguising, and there's a number of reasons why they're doing this, but we'll get into that. But they're disguising success and wrapping it around gross revenue because either A, they're not tracking their actual net profit, which is very common. I know that for that's very common. Meaning they're not tracking their operating expenses, their monthly operating costs. They're not tracking, what their mortgage, like they know what their mortgage payments are. And people are literally saying, and they're tracking how much gross revenue does it make and does the property pay for itself. Those are the two most common levels of measurement for success for an individual who doesn't track their numbers. Meaning if I made $5,000 in gross income this month, but my bank account says positive $2,000 this month, I'm doing good. I'm sitting pretty. And then they'll use I made $5,000 this month on social media. But the reality is they only netted 2. Now, that's not a bad thing. That's actually great. Good for you, right? Maybe. Like if I had $1 million property and I only netted $2,000 a month, that's not good. Okay. But I made 5,000. So people tend to latch on to the idea of gross revenue as a metric for success. I see it all the time when people are selling properties, especially realtors. This property will gross 20% or 20% ROI. So revenue divided by the purchase price. All right. Which we've heard the metrics. I have a rule of thumb. If it hits 20%, then it could be a good deal. Keyword could, right? Because gross revenue doesn't take into account your monthly operating costs or your debt or any of your expenses. So debt aside, your mortgage payments, debt aside, your monthly expenses. Okay. And especially beach markets, for example, I see this all the time. Wow. My property grossed, it's got a 15% gross ROI. That's awesome. Or gross revenue. It's grossing $150,000. Yeah, but your insurance is $15,000 or $20,000 a year, which completely depletes your cash flow, and you're probably breaking even. So the 200,000 or the 150, whatever the number is, it doesn't matter, right? It's all about profitability. It's all about breaking down and getting the full picture of the formula of success, of cash flow. But the problem is people aren't doing that, right? They're only painting a picture of high level gross. Oh, this property can gross this. And look, if you're an agent or a broker, I totally understand why you should own like why you can only really say gross revenue because you can't you don't know how people are going to host, you don't know what they're going to do, you don't know what expenses they're going to incur. Like there's a lot of assumptions made on what the cash flow side is going to look like. So, and everybody's different. Some people are going to do all this crazy stuff. They're going to integrate AI and end up with like hundreds of dollars worth of subscriptions and end up with the same result. And other people are going to be, savvy with what they do. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing though is being real on setup costs, what it's going to cost to get that gross revenue, and also, what the expected operating costs can be. So that's what the investors need to figure out. But we have to be careful when we see a property is making, oh wow, it's making all this gross income. What are the expenses? Okay. Or if it's not already a short-term rental and someone's telling you it can gross a certain amount, and this is the one that this is where the sharks are, and this is what you got to be careful. Oh yeah, that's a 20% ROI. Oh yeah, that'll make over $200,000. It's not currently a short-term rental. Cool. How much do I have to invest into that property to get it to that level? Okay. That's the part they leave out. Oh, well, you're going to have to really, do some elevated design. You're going to have to use a specific designer out there in order to hit that. You're going to have to spend $500,000 to get that kind of revenue. Right. But at the end of the day, so I was telling someone the other day, I was like, look, like if I spend $500,000, I want it has to net 100K, if, or, 75, 100K. If it doesn't net that, it's like, no, I mean, that's a lot of money. $500,000 in a property. If it doesn't net 100K, what the freak was this all for? People are, well, if it grosses over 200,000, it better be grossing 300,000. If I'm going to spend that kind of money with all the expenses and the upkeep and everything, right? That's the one thing people don't talk about is when you start to crazy amenitize like theme park or property, there's a lot of upkeep in that as well. So you need the revenue to push even higher. The $200,000 mark is a vanity metric because it doesn't actually mean anything based on your expenses. So be very cautious when people use these individual occupancy rate, number of bookings you're getting, my rating, the rating of the property is so high, guest satisfaction, all these, and then finally gross revenue. That doesn't tell you the full picture. It doesn't tell you everything you need to know. Okay. A lot of times, what I tell people is great job, good job. It's a pat on, it's an attaboy metric, right? It's good job. You're doing great there, buddy. And I say that, it's a little bit of a, snarky comment, but I don't mean it like that. It is cool. That is impressive that you have a 5.0 or 4.98 rating with like 100 reviews. That is genuinely impressive, right? But don't act like that's profitability. And that's where you have to be careful. Okay. Now, you could combine all these things together, know your expenses and everything, and the property be incredibly successful. There we go. That is really what we're after. But if you're truly chasing, like what you have to define success when you're evaluating properties. And when people are talking about, well, they get a lot of bookings, that doesn't mean anything, right? So just be careful when you hear these vanity metrics. And I'm sure there's other ones out there. I mean, you could take pieces of everything like, oh, the expenses are low on this one. Cool. Well, what kind of gross revenue is this? So there's always like a bunch of different things that you have to piece together to truly understand what your return on investment is to get the full picture, whether you're evaluating a deal or you're just trying to understand your own success, like in how you're defining success. But any of these things, excelling in any of these different categories isn't wrong to do. It's actually like you should do, right? But it's in combination with the others. And that's the lesson for today. Be a smart, wise, savvy investor. I'm telling you, you will be able to see through the crap and you'll be able to find the deals and you'll be able to cash flow, right? And if you're currently, hopefully, for some of you, this is probably a little bit of a wake up call as well in terms of, your performance and how your property is producing and how you're judging your own success. So think about that. Really look at your, do your bookkeeping and look at your P&Ls, your profit and loss statements, and see how your property is truly performing. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I think this episode's going to come out after I have a baby. So I'm going to have a third baby. The due date is April 18th. I don't know when this episode's dropping. So if you're hearing this, I probably have a baby now, and I will see you in a few weeks with updates. And guys, I'm filming this before we have the baby, obviously. And we don't know if it's going to be a boy or girl. Kind of exciting stuff. So yeah, I'll keep you posted, and I'll give you an update the next time I see you. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Cash Flow Positive.